It is my pleasure to introduce Matt Segal. I remember when I first came to PCC, Matt was a kind of larger-than-life figure for me. I was very much in awe of his intellect, and I'm still in awe of him, but these days I'm more in awe of his humanity. And I think Matt is doing very well, something that we're all trying to do here, to carry these two poles of the mind and the heart. And I'm really grateful and appreciative to have Matt as a friend and to have him as an example in this world of a way that we can try to carry the head and the heart together. And let's welcome Matt.
These introductions are so heartfelt and sentimental. It's hard to think afterwards, but we'll try. So, it's really exciting to be able to present in front of all of you. I think there's a space of possibility that opens up for me that I've had to cultivate by forcing myself to do as many public speaking events as possible, to the point where it becomes exciting because thinking out loud in front of a captive audience really allows my mind to expand, and it allows me to start to develop new concepts, but concepts defined as common fields of feeling. We get to feel into these new conceptual spaces together. Even if you're just out there nodding your head, it helps me reach towards some common conceptual structure that we're creating together. So I really value this time. Thank you for listening. What I'm going to try to do in the next 20 minutes, hopefully less because I want to actually hear from you and not just see shaking heads, is lay out what will become the first chapter of my dissertation. And we're going to meet a very important thinker who you might say is the guardian of the threshold. So I think of him anyways, Immanuel Kant. Is his name? Any Kantians in the audience? Yeah, everyone? All right, I wasn't expecting too many, but in studying Kant deeply, and you can keep going deeper and discovering new things, my respect for him has increased. And even if he does represent this sort of Saturnian limitation, preventing me from being able to articulate and speculate about the cosmos at large, the nature of the human psyche, the nature of the divine, even if Kant seems to stand in the way of speculating about those ideas, he seems to sharpen my ability to avoid deluding myself and thinking I have knowledge of those things when really I don't. So we really, I think, need to pay respects to this person. And all of if philosophy is a wisdom tradition, and there are these figures that it's so easy to critique because we've seen the crystallization of the worldview that they first articulated as ideas, that then they became our world, and we obviously want to change this world. And it's easy to blame them for having created this world, but unless we fully understand the ideas that went into creating this world, we can't change it. So Kant, he articulated what he called a transcendental method, which was a critique of all metaphysics that came prior to him. And as far as he was concerned, there really was no philosophical knowledge prior to him. It was all just what he called transcendental illusions. People were speculating about the nature of the universe just based on, really, Aristotle. They were reading it in a book, and the way that Aristotle broke down the structure of the Greek language logically, he just assumed that the structure of our thought, linguistically, was mirrored by the structure of being. And so there's no need to, go test our intuitions and experiment. We could just assume that our mind is directly linked up to the structure of being. And what Kant pointed out is that our mind is actively constructing our experience. And right at the very beginning of his first major book, he published before, but the first world historical book, I think, is his Critique of Pure Reason in 1781. Right at the beginning of that book, there are these 20 pages called the Transcendental Aesthetic. And in these 20 pages, Kant tries to articulate how the mind generates this sort of stage upon which all the objects of our experience are dancing. And that stage is constructed in terms of space and time. And for Kant, our experience of space and time are, again, he called them forms of intuition that are constructed by our mind. His little phrase is that space and time are empirically real in that we all experience them in, he thought, an identical way, that there's a universal, we share universally, all human beings, the same basic structure of space and time. They're empirically real in that sense, experientially real, but they're transcendentally ideal, which is to say that what reality is independent of our mind's activity and our mind's construction of this spatio-temporal stage that we experience the world upon. What the world is independent of that, we can't say. We don't know. We only know the world in terms of space and time. There could be, Kant speculated, alien intelligences on other planets that have different forms of intuition, totally different experience of space and time. And, we have no access to that. We only have access to the spatio-temporal stage that our mind constructs for us. So right off the bat, we're limited in our knowledge of reality. Really, we don't have knowledge of reality. And Kant's whole project was to say, well, what can we have knowledge of then? Well, we can have knowledge of our own process of knowing. We can turn the speculative gaze back upon our own thinking and discover what is necessary for our kind of thinking. We can discover the transcendental conditions that make possible our kind of experience. We can't know what lies beyond that experience in the world itself, but we can know a lot about how our mind generates this form of experience. And that leads to a whole sort of interesting speculations about the nature of human freedom and what it means that we can experience beauty in nature. And in Kant's last critique, the Critique of Judgment, he sort of opens up into the kind of thought that I'm trying to move into in my dissertation. And there's a series of post-Kantian thinkers, Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel, most famous among them, who found an opening, a crack in the wall that Kant built, keeping us from penetrating to the nature of reality, that had to do with aesthetics and had to do with the nature of our experience of beauty when we behold the natural world around us. And in my dissertation, I'm building on Whitehead and Schelling, one of those post-Kantian thinkers, to try to, spell out in a more contemporary language, because I think, Schelling did a pretty good job spelling this out himself, and as did Whitehead. But I want to try to, inject some sort of poetic. I want to reperform the insights that they discovered in a way that I think the ears of our time can hear, perhaps. So, in Whitehead's most famous book, Process and Reality, he says something interesting about these 20 pages, the Transcendental Aesthetic. I'll read you what he says. He says, the philosophy of organism, which is how Whitehead describes his own ontology, his own speculative philosophy, the philosophy of organism aspires to construct a critique of pure feeling in the philosophical position in which Kant put his critique of pure reason. So Whitehead wants to replace the critique of pure reason with the critique of pure feeling. He goes on, he says, this should also supersede, the critique of pure feeling should supersede the remaining critiques required in the Kantian philosophy. The critique of practical reason and the critique of judgment were these other critiques that Kant articulated. Whitehead thought they weren't necessary at all if we, instead of focusing on how thought constructs the world, we start maybe not just thinking about, but feeling into how the world is constructed by emotional vectors, feelings of causal inheritance from the world around us. What if perception is direct and immediate, the immediate inheritance of the emotional dynamics of the beings in our environment, instead of being a construction of our cognitive apparatus, right? So it's sort of like a bottom-up understanding of perception, experience, and knowledge, rather than a top-down sort of intellectual understanding of the construction of experience. So critique of pure feeling would replace the rest of the Kantian critiques. So then Whitehead says, thus, in the organic philosophy, Kant's transcendental aesthetic becomes a distorted fragment of what should have been his main topic. So 600-page book, Critique of Pure Reason, 20 pages, that he really should have maybe unpacked a bit more. So what would it mean to unpack this a little bit? If we just think about space and time as they arise for us, in our feelings of them, if we want to try to access the most concrete meaning of space and time, one way we could do that is to just refer to, in terms of the most concrete form of space, well, here we are. The most concrete form of time, now. But as soon as I say that, here, now, time has kept going, the planets moved through, it's around the sun in its orbit. So the here and now that I was trying to point you to a few moments ago is no longer the same here and now that I'm trying to point you to here and now. So these words here and now that seem so particular, concrete, focused, and specific actually are pretty abstract. They refer to any here and now. And this is a sort of dialectical maneuver that Hegel leads us through, where he shows how an empiricist thinks that what they think is most concrete and present is actually pretty abstract. The here and now is not as concrete as it at first appears to be. So that's not going to work to get at space and time. We can't get at them empirically, right? So maybe if we try a cosmological approach to this, like going back to Plato thought of space and time. Space for him was what he called the Korra. It's sometimes translated as the receptacle. It's sort of the medium that holds all forms. It's the sort of etheric space of possibility that allows for actuality. And so it's abstract, but there's a little bit more of a feeling that you can get for what it would mean to swim in the Korra. It holds us. Plato refers to it as the Wetnurse of all becoming. It gives birth to form, eternal form in the spatio-temporal world of becoming. It's the nurturing mother that allows the forms to survive, to flower within the visible material world. It's the Korra. And in terms of time, Plato would point us to the heavens, to the sky, and say that time is brought forth by the musical, rhythmic motions of the heavens. So time becomes something you can almost see. It takes a little bit of imagination to see the motion of the planets night after night moving through a harmonious rhythmical pattern. But it's still, Plato's sense of space and time as the Korra and the sky, basically. It starts to be a little bit more concrete. But for Kant, what he was trying to draw our attention to is that whether we're talking about the here and now, or we're talking about the Korra and the sky, our understanding of those ideas, those ways of getting at the meaning of space and time, are all based on, we learn about them through experience. They're empirical in that sense. And he wanted to try to articulate what space and time were transcendentally. In other words, what can we know about space and time prior to any experience of the sky and the motion of the planets, or of any specific moments here and now? What can we know about space and time prior to that? And, Kant said that there was something we could know about space and time prior to that, which is that, his definition of space and time, of space, let's say, is just, it's the condition for the possibility of objects external to myself. And the fact that I experience objects in my environment that comes after the fact. It presupposes that there is a space that would allow for objects to be outside of me. So I don't learn about space by seeing objects outside of me, says Kant. Space had to have been there for me to even experience objects in the first place, right? That's what the a priori, the transcendental nature of space implies. It's a condition for the possibility of there being objects at all. I can't learn about space by seeing objects. Because when you look in your environment, all you see are colored surfaces, right? You don't see space. Space is presupposed. It's lying beneath the colored surfaces, making them possible. And similarly, so if space is the condition for the possibility of experiencing objects outside of yourself, time for Kant it's how the self experiences itself. It's how the mind is affected by itself. So Kant said that time is our inner intuition of the passage of our own experience. Time is a form of inner intuition, where space is a form of outer intuition. Right? So now I have to explain Whitehead in 3 minutes. I started to get at it before, where it's a critique of pure feeling instead of the critique of reason. And instead of thinking of space and time as these forms, these ideas really, that pre-structure our experience, how can we understand space and time not just as something that we, in the good old-fashioned empiricist sense, that we construct these abstract notions of space and time based on our experience of objects and based on our experience of motion, of whether it's planets in the sky or hands around the clock. But how do we construct them in a way that's still transcendental, in that it's a condition for the possibility of our experience, but that's rooted in feeling instead of thought? And what Whitehead suggests is that, yes, human beings have a certain form of mind that constructs space and time. Each of our minds constructs it's a unique form of space and time, though. And, we're very similar. We're members of the same species, so each of our constructed spatio-temporal fields overlaps more or less, and we're able to coordinate with one another pretty easily, right? But this is not what Kant was suggesting. He thought there's one universal form of space and time that all human beings necessarily share. What Whitehead is suggesting is that, no, we have, each of us has our own, we're independent organisms, but we've evolved, we have a shared history. And so each of the spatio-temporal experiential fields that we bring forth, we've been coupled with one another for long historical periods, and that's allowed us to coordinate these are multiple experiences of different spacetimes. And all species are bringing forth their own experiential fields of space-time. And, again, they more or less overlap. But part of what Whitehead wants to move us into is a sense of space and time as, first of all, plural, and the fact that we can talk about them in general it's more of it's a communal achievement of all of the beings making up this universe, that there is some coherent framework that we can call space and time, and that we can more or less measure and coordinate the entire history of the universe based on. But it's an achievement. It's not given. It's not a static, a priori, formal structure that was just bestowed upon our experience from eternity. No, it's a historical achievement. The shape of space and time is a historical achievement that is an ongoing work of art, really. We're continuing to create them together. We're not subject to space and time as a sort of prison that locks us into our solipsistic experience. We're co-creators of future space-times that we can't even imagine yet. So those are some hints for you about what Whitehead might want to do to Kant. To critique not reason. Reason's really good at critiquing itself, and it can spin in circles forever. Maybe when we start getting lost in those spirals of abstract reflection, we lose sight of a more concrete experiential foundation for knowledge, even for metaphysical knowledge about the divine, about the universe, about the nature of the human soul. Which isn't to say we shouldn't, I'm pretty obsessed with trying to theorize about the nature of feeling. Thinking is amazing. I'm not saying stop thinking. I'm saying think in a way that elucidates your felt experience of the world instead of that cuts you off from that felt experience and makes it seem like just a theater that you're viewing on a screen in this strange disembodied space. So space and time are not something that are simply given to us. We can help to actively, together, it's a communal effort, but we can together change the way that we experience space and time and break out of that Kantian prison. But again, let's not demonize Kant. I think if he were standing on the other side of that prison cell, he'd probably have one foot on the other side and one foot inside the prison cell, dangling the keys in front of us. He was a reasonable guy. If he were here now and we could all talk to him, we might be able to convince him to let us out. And he might be willing to let himself out. So that's about all I can squeeze into 20 minutes. Thanks for listening. What time is the next? I hope so. What time is the next one supposed to start? At 11? Mine was 10 minutes behind, so maybe a few questions. You first. Yeah.
Linking your talk with Jeff's talk,
Yeah.
do you see a role of psychedelics in moving us away from the intellect into experiencing feeling, a critique of feeling?
Definitely. I don't see it so much as I don't think we need to move away from the intellect so much as change the way that the intellect makes sense of experience. Because in Whitehead's picture, the intellect, the reflective mind is itself, and knowledge is itself a form of feeling. It's a complex form of feeling. Kant saw that, he said there are two sources of our experience: sensibility, our sensory experience of the world, and the understanding or our reflective thought. These are two separate sources. And Whitehead's saying, no, it's all the same source. It's all feeling. And knowledge is a particularly complex form of feeling that's built up of contrasts of feelings that it gives us just a higher order perception, but it's still feeling.
Well, I was just thinking.
And psychedelics do transform the way that feelings are synthesized into what we call knowledge in a really fascinating way. So they're a major catalyst for co-constructing new forms of space and time together, for sure.
I was just thinking, we habituate. Okay. We habituate ourselves in certain ways of thinking. I thought maybe psychedelics could just push us out of that route.
They're good for breaking habits. Yeah.
Nice question, Clint. Like that. It sounds to me like you're speaking a lot of Hume too, like with the passion, right? Mm-hmm. Coming out of passion. I'm curious with what you were just talking about of then how you place Kant's categorical imperative, namely that we would act or think, but in this case feel, right, that we would will others to make the same decision we do in that case, and how you would place that in terms of Whitehead.
Well, for Kant, the categorical imperative, the notion that human beings have freedom was something that for Kant was unique to us, unique to our species, and that the rest of nature is determined, at least in terms of how we know it. Again, what nature is in itself, Kant wouldn't say, but how the way that science understands nature, based on how our mind constructs reality, it's all determined. It's all mechanistic as far as Kant was concerned. There's a little ambiguity with living organisms because he recognizes you can't really. He said there's no Newton of the grass blade. You can't have a mechanical explanation of life. Some people would say, well, Darwin provided that, but I wouldn't say that really. So what Whitehead does is he says every creature has some degree of freedom. He would use the word creativity instead of freedom. And that the human being, because of our intense social bonding and linguistic capacity, has developed, maybe you could say, an awareness of our creativity. So there's a second order reflection upon the fact that we have creativity, which gives it a new, it's such a new form of experience, as far as we can tell, that it makes it seem like it's, that it just came out of the blue, and it disconnects the human species from the rest of life, because we have this special freedom. But we need to recognize its specialness without making it separate our species from all the other forms of life, and the deeper cosmic freedom or cosmic creativity that has been at work for billions of years. So in a sense, it tempers Kant's sense of how free human beings are, and I think it has to kind of we have to lower our expectations of just like having a strong will and having that make us moral people when as individuals, like, we can just will ourselves to be good. It's a very kind of puritanical notion of conscience that maybe needs to be relaxed a little bit, and that maybe goodness is something we achieve together. It takes a collective effort. It's not just the individual will. And granted, when Kant's talking about the categorical imperative, he's trying to make the individual will link up to some universal will. So there's, again, Kant is deeper than my caricature, perhaps, but it's a longer conversation. Does that kind of... Okay. Sean, and then we'll do one more over here. Sam.
Thank you, Matt, for that. Just brilliant, delightful. Vintage, Matt. A new vintage has just been put on the shelf. Yeah, a new bottle. Just one occurred to me as you were speaking, Emerson. One link between Kant and Whitehead might be Thomas Berry's, wonderful phrase. If we can move to see, the whole world as it's an ecological version of Kant, as a communion of subjects rather than a collection of objects, which is precisely what Whitehead does, right? Yeah. So that each actual occasion is a subject.
Yeah.
And so Thomas is adapting this phrase from Kant, where the moral worldview is to see all humans as a communion of subjects.
Right.
Thomas is extending that to So that's one.
Yeah.
But just a brief question. How does Whitehead's notion of eternal objects relate to the construction of space-time? I mean, surely there is some kind of a priori from a Whiteheadian point of view with space-time and with the eternal objects.
Yeah, there is. I don't need that, yeah. So there's the primordial nature of God, which Becca was talking about a little bit yesterday, which is the divine's initial. So there's just pure creativity, right? That's the ultimate principle for Whitehead. And then the divine is the first limitation upon that pure creativity, that pure potential. And that first limitation, it structures the realm of eternal objects, which are just possibilities. An eternal object for Whitehead is a possibility for actualization. So colors, the color red is a possibility that can be actualized in any given experience, right? The color red doesn't emerge from a particular actual occasion. It has to ingress into that actual occasion from the space of possibilities. So once the divine gives that initial ordering to the eternal objects, that becomes the sort of cosmic genetic sequence that then gets repeated. It provides the initial aim, he says, for all the other actual occasions and their moments of experience. And so if we think about this cosmologically, the structure of space-time, as we, as physicists, understand it, is basically given by the most pervasive, what Whitehead would call the most pervasive society of actual occasions in our cosmic epoch, which is, he calls it the Electromagnetic Society. So electrons are dispersed throughout this universe as far as we can see, and or light, you could say, is dispersed throughout this universe as far as we can see, and the actual occasions of experience that are making up the society, the Electromagnetic Society, are shaped by that initial aim, ordering of possibilities by the divine, that gives a certain texture to space-time that then all the other societies we're all made up of protons and electrons and